audible and everyone can hear me? Okay, hello. It looks like there seems to be some kind of can you guys hear me? Am I audible or am I not? Looks like I'm not. Hello. Am I audible? Yes. Okay, no. Microphone. Hello. Can you hear me? I think I'm audible now. Great. So, welcome to Basic Workshop. So, this is basically a workshop on web development, and we'll be covering. Yes, I did. Yeah. So, welcome to it's this is a basic workshop on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and this basically involves building a basic web page and also learning which languages to use, how the components go together, and so on and so forth. Okay, so now, what is web dev? So web dev is, or rather web development is how websites or web pages are built. Now, you can say that generally any web page consists of three components. You have the skeleton, or which is coded by HTML, the language, or and you have styling on top of it, or which is basically coded by CSS, and the functionality, which is coded by JS. An example would be the page you're looking at right now. So when you say structure, we say things like say the top right button is a share button, there's a slideshow button. The buttons themselves are structure. You can see that the share button is colored in yellow, sorry, orange or rather, and that orange color is due to the CSS. And the functionality, what happens when we click on it, all that is done by the JS or the JavaScript. Now let's start. Now there is a minimal setup that we would require you guys to do in your own laptops or computers, whatever you're using, so that you could, code along with me as I do this. So the first thing is to download a software called VS Code. Now, VS Code is the code editor we are using, that I'm using. You can also use something else if you're comfortable with it. If not, I definitely suggest to download VS Code and also use the live server extension, which I'll also show you how to do it. So we're gonna say, so we'll just say download Visual Studio Code there, and you can say, for since mine is a Mac, I can just download it from here. But you will also have, depending on which OS you use, you would have your own installation installer. So now, once you've actually installed VS Code, we would open it here, and we would basically have to download a couple of extensions. Now, these extensions say basically serve certain functions. So the extension we are using now is basically an extension called Live Server. This. So live server basically lets us launch a local server and then sort of host our HTML or rather our web page on that server. So this is the live server we are going to use. Uh, Hopefully you've been able to follow up till now. And then after installing it, you should enable it, right? Now let's back. Now after you've downloaded VS Code, hopefully, and you have also set up the live server extension, we would now create a folder. Now you can call where in this folder we would have three files: one HTML, one CSS, one JavaScript, and you would preferably name them as such. Now, the best way to create these files is from within VS Code, and I'll just show you how. So we basically have, say, I've already made three files here, so I'll just delete them and make them again so that it'll be easier. Trash. So all I need to do is say I have a let me delete the folder as well so that right. So I'll just say new folder and I'm calling it examples, or rather let me just call it project, right? And within this project I will be creating three files: index.html, and then another file would be styles.css, right? And the third file would basically be script.js. Now, right, so we would have to create these three files and then we would code each of them independently and link them. We'll see how we do that shortly. Right. So first, let's look at HTML. So HTML, or hypertext markup language, is basically what we use to build the structure and content of the web page. Now, yes, so basically, what do I mean by structure and content? So you can see that there are two lines of code here. So this is the syntax of HTML. So each element of HTML, that's what we call them, elements, basically are have an opening tag, some content inside it, and a closing tag. And that whole thing is basically an element. So now we have various elements, and each element you could say would have some certain structure and content. Now the structure is basically due to the tag itself, and the content is what's inside the two tags, the opening and the closing tag. Now now let's actually look at some general tags that we use in HTML. Now there is the heading tag. Now these are headings. There are six headings, each with increasing or rather decreasing font sizes. So rather decreasing font sizes. So heading 1 is the largest, heading 6 is the smallest. Now you notice that there are also two other tags that have been used, basically HTML and body, and something else also called doc type HTML. So now HTML, the HTML tag is basically the main tag or the root element. Basically, it has everything the web page has. So that's where the web page starts and that's where the web page ends. Inside it, we here have something called the body. We can also have something called the header. So that is independent from the body. So body is what you are seeing displayed in your web page, and header is basically at the top. So you see that there is some kind of a title here. So you see that there is an intro to WebDev. So that goes in the header, and a couple of other things which we'll see. So here we only have a body, and these are six heading tags. Now you can also have links. So you can link one page to another, obviously, and the way we do it is through an A tag. So you say A, you open the tag A, then you have href, which basically is the reference or what we are referring to, a link, and then the content, basically this is a link. That's the content we have here, and that itself is linked to the web page. So once you basically say host this HTML code onto a server, and then you try to be at a local server anywhere and you open it, this is what you'll see. So you will see an H2 with HTML links. There'll be a paragraph, right? So the paragraph is another tag that we haven't talked about. So that basically is, you could say, it is not a heading. It is basically sort of like the general body text. So it is basically what you would use to type something which is not a heading. So here it says that HTML links are defined with a tag, and then so then you have this is a link, right? So the link basically connects it. I think I've explained it twice already, so that should be fine. So let's go on. Form. So the form is basically so whenever you look at sign in page, you basically have forms there. So you would have an email address, you have a password, and you basically submit it, and then the data goes. So if we were to build a form using HTML, this is how we'd go about doing it. So you have a form tag wherein you basically have a label tag, which you can see here, and there's an input tag. Now, the label is basically you have first name, uh, which is an example here, which has been used. And then you have an input, which basically also specifies the type of input, which is a text in this case. Now, another thing that we see is so far what we haven't seen are these type equal to ID equal to name equal to these are what we call attributes. So these help us in CSS, which we'll see. I think it's the next slide. So, and it will also help us in JavaScript as well. And it also gives some added, how do you say it, categorization. For example, you have the type equal to text, which is giving a text box where we can type something. And you have the type equal to submit, which is giving you a submit button, right? So that is basically the difference. Right, so now let's look at what CSS is. So CSS or cascading style sheets is basically how you style something. Now you can see here that this is the styling we've used. This is how the CSS looks, the syntax, and that is how it looks once you use it on a HTML code. So now what we can see here is that for the body tag, we have a background color of light blue. So and for H1, the color has been made white and the text line has been made center. So you can add colors to it. You can add, you can align them however you want. And we can also see that the paragraph tag has a different font size. It is 20 pixels now and has a different font as well, which is now Verdana. So we basically use CSS to style many things. So you might have seen before that the heading tags are of different sizes. So you might ask, since it's already of different sizes, why do we need CSS? So the way I look at it is those heading tags are sort of to differentiate between each other, and you can basically style one without touching the other by using different heading tags. Now you have something called selectors. So you've seen before that we have these attributes, I believe. One second. Right here. So we have these attributes. So one of the attributes that we basically use in relation to CSS is something called a class. So what you can do is you can take a tag and add a class attribute to it. So you can see here that there's a paragraph tag in the end and it has a class attribute of intro. Now what I can do is I can have a, a CSS which says dot intro. This is basically referring to all elements which have a class of intro, and I'm saying the background color is yellow, right? So then the background color of everything which has a class of intro becomes yellow. Now, another new tag that we see here is something called div. So div is basically division. So what we are saying, doing here is we are Basically taking these two paragraph tags and you're adding two more tags, not that they have any content of sorts, but they add the content, but it is basically to give a new structure to it and just add the background color to them. You can say that I can just add class attributes to each of them individually, but this might be simpler when you have, say, hundreds of tags or, say, quite a few tags. This will become easier. That is just the case, right? So let's move on. So these are selectors. And now linking. Now, so far, the idea has been that what we so it is possible to write the CSS code within the HTML page, although I haven't really shown how we do that. What is generally preferred is writing the CSS in a different document and then linking that to your HTML page. So this is how we do it. So you can see that we have a header tag now. So I said that you can use the header to add a title, basically which comes at the top. What you can also do is you can link style sheets. You can link CSS style sheets. And this is how we do it. So we say link rel is equal to style sheet and then href and then the link of the style sheet. And that is how CSS works. Now let's look at JavaScript. So far what we've been able to do is we can create a website, we can add content to the website, then we can add colors. Then it'll basically look like at best a newspaper. We need to add some functionality to it. We don't want it to be just something that you scroll endlessly. So the way JavaScript works is you can say the user interacts with the page. Say clicks on a button, hovers over something. That triggers an event. Then then you listen to this event. Then you run a certain function. Then this function basically modifies the page in some way. So you can think of that to be the whole ecosystem pathway, whatever you want to call it, of the way JavaScript roughly works. Events. So as I said, so this is an example. So this is a button tag. So this basically creates a button. So once you click on the button, an event is triggered, which we can listen to. And what we say is that when we listen to the event, let us trigger certain functions which run, then those functions change the web page. So that is the idea. So and the function which basically does this, which basically is activated or rather evaluated once the event is triggered is called an event handler. And you can use on click, the function runs, and you can also use a couple of other things. As I mentioned, hovering is one of them. Right, so what are functions? I'm sure as you've seen in other languages, functions are basically, say, certain statements that evaluate once a function is run or something. Is a easy way to look at it. Right. Now, one of the most, I think, unique things about JavaScript, especially because it handles or something that it works with web pages, is something called DOM manipulation. So DOM is basically something called document object model. So the way it works is so the DOM manipulation the way it works is so we've talked about how JavaScript creates functionality. So the way it does that is it first has to look into what is happening on the HTML, whether somebody is clicking it or not. So first it should be able to examine the state. First it should be able to examine the element state, right? So in this case, an example would be to see if a box is checked or not. And once it examines that, it should be able to change the state of maybe something else. So we should be able to add some text, we should be able to add something else, and we should also be able to add some color changes as well. Say, make a paragraph red is the example we used. So I think after all this is done, now we should really start coding. Hopefully, you've been able to keep track of all this, and maybe not, even if not, you might be able to understand the code because it is usually logical, fairly logical. So let's start off, right? So what we'll be doing is we'll be starting off with the index page. Now, as for what we are building, the idea is to build, right. So the idea is to build an EMI calculator, which basically say has some inputs. You have the interest, you have the loan years, and you calculate the EMI, and you get your monthly payments. And to add another feature, which is basically to toggle between light and dark modes. That is the primary idea. So you realize that this basically covers a significant amount of what we've done so far, right? So let's begin. So the way we first start, say, coding anything in HTML is basically starting with something called a doc type. Doc type HTML. That it basically tells the web page that this is an HTML code, nothing else. Then you say HTML, lang is English, right? Then you start off with the head. So now the couple of tags that we would have to add. First is something called a meta car set. Now this is basically to indicate which character set we're using. I believe this is the Unicode abbreviation, which basically helps us, which helps the browser know which characters we're using. Then we add another meta tag, HTTP equivalent compatible. Now this is basically for uh, is for the edge case of using um, Internet Explorer Edge. So Edge basically, as far as I know, has a couple of issues. So you would have to add this to let it know to do things a bit differently in the case of Edge. Now another very important tag is basically this, which is basically viewport. So what viewport does is, so this is the idea of this is that you would have to rather it adjusts the window size to the size of to the width of your uh, device, whichever you're using. Now, the reason it is very important is you don't want web pages being wider than your uh, device. It could be longer so that you could, you would scroll, but if it's wider, you have other issues. So then you say, oh, my bad, it goes inside. And you say initial scale is 1.0, right? So another thing, so as we've talked earlier, there is, I think I can just do this title, yes. So we will add the title, calculator. So title is what really appears on the tabs of your browser, so that that is what's written in the tag. So you can just read the tag and get to know what it is. It is basically just there as a convention and also as to be informative. You could say that. I think is the best way to say it. Right. So now let's start building the body. So while we build the body, I will open it with a live server so that we can see what's happening while it is happening. It might be better for us to do it that way. Let me just do it side by side. So, right, so first let's have an H1. So then we say EMI calculator, right? So another good thing about the live server is that you don't need to refresh it, it'll refresh itself. So that's another good thing. So now, what we have to create now is the form. So we don't really need right down. So you will first create a label. The label is loan amount, say. That's your label. And then the input, which is type, is a number, right? The loan amount is a number. And then you will give it a name. The reason we give it a name is because we can fetch it in our JavaScript using this name. So we'll just say loan amount. So you must have noticed that I used the first letter of loan to be a lowercase, and the case of amount of A and amount to be uppercase. That is basically the convention, so that it is easier to read. That's the convention we use in JavaScript. There is no special reason. Um, Now we basically replicate this. So just copy that. I think we need what? One for loan amount, one for interest rate. Interest rate. And I believe, what else do we need? Yes, one for the loan term. So let's change these names as well. I'll call them okay. Let's see. Um, right. Okay, so we have this ready. Okay, let's go on. This would be the loan term. We'll just call it loan term. I think that should be right. Now we need to create another button, which is your submit button. If you remember, we already had a similar button like this in our presentation. So just have a submit. There we go. It's at the end, if you can see. And we will give this say a value, basically EMI calculator. Calculate. That seems about right. So I think we are pretty much done with the first part of it. So you can notice that we don't have a button to toggle between dark mode and light mode. We'll get to that later after we're done with building the EMI calculator. Right, so now what we'll do here is we will do two things. Uh, we will link our JavaScript and also our CSS. So we would link our CSS in the header. So that is how it. So we say link says rel style sheet href styles or CSS. That is how we link it in the header, and we link the script in at the bottom of the body. Now, the reason we do this isn't really anything special, just that, just say script source builder. Yes. So the reason we do that is it basically, the browser reads it from top to bottom. So if the script is too, how do you say, too heavy, it will take too long or rather forever for the website to uh, render the entire web page. So we put at the end so the HTML renders first and then the script is eventually activated. So, right. So we basically have linked our script.js and we've also linked our styles.css. So now let's go on and start writing some JavaScript. So now what we'll do is that we will first have to try to, okay, let's take this step by step. So what do we want to happen? What we want is when we click on calculate EMI, it should calculate the EMI based on the values in loan amount, interest rate, and loan term, right? So first, what we do is that we say document. So document is basically the HTML document. Then you say query selector, which is basically is what we use to find a certain element in our HTML. So what we want to do is we want to find the form, right? Because the form has a submit button. Then we say, then we add something called an event list now. So we want to listen to the events that happen in the form element. Okay. Now, the type of event that we want to do is basically listen to what happens when you submit it, right? And what you want to run is a function, which happens to be a function of the event that occurs, right? So this is the basic idea. Now, the first thing that we want to do is something called preventing a default. Now, the idea is, so the reason why we do that is because, say, if I click on calculate EMI, the whole thing basically reloads. Let me just click on it. Right, since I have a prevent default, I still have my numbers there on the fields. If I don't have that, let me just comment this and run it again, it doesn't do that. I won't have my, they go away, and that is an issue for us because they won't really be in those values won't really be there anymore since the website is reloaded now. So that's why we need to prevent the default. That's why we use this. So now what we'll do is we will try to get the values which are there in loan amount, interest rate, and loan term. So we use something called a const. So then we use a const is a basic idea that since these are values which should not change. I think yes, you should have I think a semicolon after the end of each statement. Of course. So the idea of having a const is that these are values which don't change for every you could say iteration of using the EMI calculator. They're the same values, and that is why we use const. We don't really need them to change. So const loan amount is again we would have to query it. So we'll use document query selector from. Now this is an interesting thing. So what we'll do is we'll say input because it is part of our input. Let's go back and see what we have here. So we have input name equal to loan amount. So we'll try to get it from the name. So what we do here is we say input and we say with square brackets name equal to loan amount. And then we say now once you get this, now this is an element. This basically gets me that element, and we have to now assign it to the value of that element. That is what we do. That's it. I think better, yes. So now something we'll do something similar for interest rate. I think I could also have copied it maybe. I guess it's fine. Query selector, input. Name is equal to, I think, interest rate dot value. Const loan term is equal to document dot query selector input name is equal to loan term dot value. That's this is basically our first three constants which we'll be using to calculate our EMI. Now let's try to get something called the monthly interest rate, which we'll be using. The monthly interest rate, I'll have to declare it const. Monthly interest rate is basically the interest rate. So now this interest rate is basically a percentage. So divided by 100. And then we want it monthly. And so we divide with 12. Now, another thing that we need is loan term in months, which is basically the loan term multiplied with 12. And now we have to use the formula for calculating EMIs. So we won't really find that out. We'll just try to copy it off from the internet. I already have the formula, so I'll just write it down. So monthly payments. Monthly payment is equal to loan amount times the monthly interest rate divided by brackets 1 minus math dot pow. This is basically power. 1 by this is a rather complex formula. 1 plus monthly interest rate comma our loan term in months, and then done. So this is basically our monthly payment. Now we have found it. So now the next thing that we would have to do is we basically have to take this monthly payment and we'll have to display it in our website. How do we do that? We will have to first create an element where we can display it. Not this. Yes. So what we'll have to do is that we would have to create an element. Now the way we do it is, you must remember that there was something called a p tag, the paragraph tag. I'll leave it empty, but I will give it an ID. An ID will be something called result. Basically, it is the result of our calculation. So it is empty now, but what we'll try to do is that we will try to add content to it through DOM manipulation. Okay, let's see if we can successfully pull that off. So the way it will work is, first you query it as always, document dot query selector, and since it's ID, what we do is this. That is what we use for ID. Dot text content. So this is basically is that you could say that when we equate this to something, the text content of the paragraph tag will change. So I'll say now we use this. So these are not exactly your, these are not, how do you say it? These are not quotes per se. These are the things that are there, I think. I'm not entirely sure what you call them. They're beside the number one in your keyboard. Maybe I can find out what they're called. Okay, maybe later. Right. So now what we'll say is that your monthly payment, that's the text. That is what we want. Your monthly payment is. Now what we do, we try to link it, or rather add, not exactly link. We will try to use the value so that we have basically just calculate it here. So the way we do that is we have a dollar and then two curly brackets. Inside, we just say a monthly payment. So this basically gets you the value. So I believe this should basically work unless, right. So there is a small thing which, so this might not, would this work? Right, so there is a small issue. So you can see that it is going on and on into, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 15 decimal places, and in total 16 digits. What we'll say is that dot to fixed 2. When we say this, what happens is it first is converted into a string, then it only has two places after decimal. So 1, say 10, 1, brilliant. So we have successfully made an EMI calculator, although it looks horrible, but that is the CSS portion, which although we will not really be styling it excessively, we will just be using the CSS to demonstrate toggling between the dark mode and the light mode. But maybe from that you could, style any other web page that you want later on. So let's try to first think. Yes, so let's add the CSS first. So the CSS is pretty basic. So I hope you remember the syntax of it. So the way it works is, so we have the body, and then you open curly brackets. Then you basically add whatever attributes, I believe they're called attributes, uh, whatever you want, and then just assign them some value. So we want the background color to be white normally, and the color, which is basically the color of the text, to be black, right? But when you have a dark mode, so now this is basically a class. Um, When you say dot, it basically refers that it is not an element that we're using, but a class. And we want this class only when it is applied to body to function like this. So we want the background color now to become black and the color to become white. Now this isn't exactly a very good dark mode because I believe normally dark modes use a very dark blue, not a black, but we'll work with this for now. Now what we'll have to do is that we will have to have a button. When you click on it, should basically change the class or rather add a class to our body element. Okay, let's try and do that. So we'll do it. First, we'll add button. Right. So let's add a button. Button. Button will just say toggle dark mode. Yes. So we have a button. It does nothing because we have no JS functionality at the moment. So button ID, and then the ID will basically be say toggle mode. Right. I think this seems about right. So this is basically very similar to what we did with the paragraph. There was no content, we added the content. Now there is no class, we'll be adding the class. But it is also different in a way that it is not exactly only adding. This is a toggle button. So we should want it to toggle between dark and no dark. It is not exactly light mode. Dark and no dark every time we click the same button. So let's see how we do that. So now what do we do is we basically have to create another function which basically executes every time that happens, or rather another event listener rather. So it's not exactly a function. So I say document dot query selector again. This time we are looking at those things which have toggle mode. In convention, that doesn't really matter. Say toggle mode, right? That is our ID. And then we say add event listener. So now upon click, right? Upon click, we want a function to execute. Right, so what does this function do? So what we will do now is we will get the root element. So we will try to add this class to the root element directly, rather toggle it to the root element directly, so that maybe if we add other elements also, those dark modes also will get toggled. So we have say const root is equal to document dot query selector. Wait, I'm sorry. Since it's the root, it is not exactly, you don't need to query select any one thing. It is basically selecting everything. So you don't use the query selector. So document dot document element. So now, since we have the root, we basically have to toggle the class. So now root, we say root dot class list, right? So it'll have a list of classes where we will toggle the, you could say, the existence of this dark mode. Right? I think this should be pretty much right. Let's see if it actually works. Right, brilliant, it works. So we have it toggling between the loan amount. So let's just try if it really works. Say 100. And then say interest rate is 10. The loan term is say 1 year. Calculate the EMI. Our monthly payment is 8.79. Let's see. Toggle dark mode works. Let's see if there is anything else. Just try to go through the code one more time so that we are clear what we're doing here. Now the code is completely done. Let's try to get an entire perspective on how the code is and then what exactly do we have it here. So let's go through the code now. So we started off with the HTML tag, right? And then within it, you basically have the head or the header, and you have the body. The header basically has the title, which you can see here, EMI calculator, and you have the link to the style sheets. And uh, we also have these three meta tags. So now one basically tells us, as I said, which character set the browser should use. Another is a special edge case for Internet Explorer Edge. The third basically is the viewport. Now, as I said, as you can see, when I change the window, it actually is coming closer. I can take it a bit farther, and you can see that although the elements themselves don't go far apart, you have more space. And as I bring it closer, they rearrange themselves. So this is why we need the viewport. And that is the head. Now, for the body, we basically have an H1 tag, which basically says EMI calculator. Now, which is basically sort of a heading. Then we have the form. Now, the form has this sort of a label input kind of mechanism, or rather, you could say format. So the first label, loan amount, input is a number. So now let's look at the input. So the input basically has a type of number. So it also could have a type of submit, and it could also have a type of text. Since it's a number, I have this uh, sort of buttons. We haven't really coded these buttons, but these are an inherent. These are basically displayed by the browser itself because we are using this type of number. So, so we have input, the type is number, and we also have named it so that we can use it in JavaScript later on. Uh, Now we have three inputs, the loan amount, interest rates, and loan term. And you have a submit button, and that is our form. Now, after the form, we basically needed to display the EMI that we calculated. We need to display it. And the way we could do that was basically through um, using a new paragraph and giving it an ID of result so that we could have used a DOM manipulation to change the text content of our paragraph element. Now we have a button which basically allows us to toggle between dark mode and light mode, and that is the end of almost the end of our body script. And we have added the script at the bottom, and as I've said, the script is usually at the bottom because it is the most heavy duty of a website usually, and it is at the bottom because It is better that the browser renders your HTML and CSS into basically what is a static web page before adding your JavaScript to the whole story. Now, this is our CSS. Our CSS currently is very basic, so I could add a couple of other things. I could say something like H1, font size is I could say large. Okay, that's not very large. I can say font size 48 pixels. Right? It becomes bigger. Say it's 36 pixels, becomes smaller, right? I can even say font family is say, Arial Helvetica sans serif. So it becomes into a sans serif font family. And I could say even add a color, which is say aqua, right? Perhaps this will be navy, right? And maybe I could also add another one for the dark mode. H1, say, with the same font family, however, maybe with a different color. Maybe I can say it's aqua now. So when I toggle it, right, so you can see that this becomes aqua, while the rest really doesn't. So maybe I can make this also navy, right? Some amount of what here navy, right? So I can do that. I can make this into aqua. So again, there are multiple things that we could do. We could style this more. We could say bring them. We can align them. We can say I can say text align center, text align center. I can toggle it and then see that it's still. And maybe if I want it to be text aligned the left, if it's in dark mode, and text aligned to the right, you can say this. That is also possible, although it is not really required and doesn't really make any sense. But as you can understand, we can use JavaScript to add classes and completely change the CSS to basically shift between themes. Um, right, so any doubts that are there within the code that maybe you got stuck on, perhaps anything I can go over again. Right, so if I believe there are no doubts, I think we can end the session here. However, and you would be, this session has been recorded and you would get the slides as well as the recording at as soon as possible. All right. Thank you. Thank you. And regards to Bootstrap, I do not believe there are any plans for that. Perhaps we can look into it as well if there are enough people interested in it. There will definitely be multiple sessions, but I would not say there are any planned as of now. But generally, there are sessions continuously given by the WebOps and Blockchain Club. This was a series of workshops, basically by multiple clubs together. We would also be organizing standalone events where we would be doing some workshops on, say, as you said, intermediate or advanced web development, where we would be using not HTML but other languages such as React.js. We would be also using Bootstrap as well as a couple of other things as well. Again, as I said, we don't really have anything planned as of yet. We normally do have workshops across the year, and we just had one now because there are quite a few freshies who don't really know web dev, and this felt like a decent way to get them introduced to the web dev and in general. And if at all you're definitely very interested in web dev, you should look into joining the club as so that you get to work on problem statements, projects, and so on and so forth. Right? Thank you. I think we can end the meeting here if there are no more doubts. I was supposed to